The crack of gunfire echoed across the Fort Richards training range as the final target fell. Thieves Canyon stood silent in the Colorado morning light, the red rocks absorbing the sound of 43 perfect shots. At the far end of the sniper course, Master Sergeant Williams lowered his binoculars and checked his stopwatch. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. Major Eleanor Ellie Morgan ejected the spent magazine from her M40A6 and rose from her prone position in one fluid motion. Her dark hair remained perfectly secured in its regulation bun, not a strand out of place despite the 2-hour qualification exercise. Dust clung to her BDUs as she collected her brass with mechanical precision, her movements betraying years of muscle memory and uncompromising discipline. The 43rd target had been positioned at 1,247 meters, well beyond the rifle's effective range in standard conditions. The shot had required perfect calculation of windage elevation and the Coriolis effect. Williams had placed it there as an impossible challenge, a psychological reminder that even the best had limitations. Major Morgan hadn't seemed to notice the impossibility. She'd simply adjusted her scope, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger between heartbeats. "That's a range record," Williams said as she approached, her expression neutral. "Nobody's ever cleared all 43. Morgan nodded once, her steel gray eyes revealing nothing. The last target was drifting left, loose mounting. The drill sergeant's radio crackled to life before he could respond. "This is command. Is Major Morgan still on the range?" "Affirmative," Williams replied. "Colonel Harrington wants her in his office. Now." Morgan secured her weapon with swift practice movements. Every action, economical, nothing wasted. It was this quality that had earned her the nickname The Machine during her time with military intelligence. That and her uncanny ability to remain emotionally detached in situations that broke most soldiers. "Looks like the old man has another impossible target for you, Major," Williams said, his weathered face creasing into a rare smile. Morgan didn't return the smile. "There's no such thing as impossible targets, Sergeant. Only inadequate shooters." Colonel James Harrington stood at his office window watching the mountain sunrise paint the Colorado landscape in hues of amber and gold. At 62, his broad shoulders still filled out his uniform impressively, though his once black hair had long since turned silver. The scars on his right hand, remnants from a Cold War operation in Berlin that remained classified, caught the morning light as he adjusted his reading glasses. On his desk lay a stack of personnel files. Atop them sat a single photograph, a female captain's official military ID. He'd studied it for hours along with the accompanying service record. Exemplary was an understatement, but what the file contained wasn't nearly as important as what had been deliberately omitted. A sharp knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter." Major Morgan stepped inside, saluting crisply. "Major Eleanor Morgan, reporting as ordered, sir." Harrington returned the salute. "At ease, Major. Please sit down." Morgan took the offered seat, her posture remaining parade ground perfect. Up close, the intensity in her gray eyes became more apparent. They missed nothing, cataloging every detail of the room with professional assessment. "I heard you just broke the range record," Harrington said, settling into his chair. "Just doing my job, sir. 43 for 43, including a shot at nearly 1,250 meters. Harrington raised an eyebrow. "That's not a job, Major. That's art." Morgan remained silent, waiting. She knew casual conversation was merely preamble. Harrington sighed, his expression growing serious. "I've been reviewing your file, Major. West Point graduate, top of your class in advanced tactical training, 4 tours in Afghanistan, expert marksmanship, hand-to-hand combat specialist, and then, most interestingly, 3 years with military intelligence that's so heavily redacted I can barely make out your name." He leaned forward. "But what caught my attention wasn't what's in your file, it's what isn't there." Morgan's face remained impassive, but something flickered behind her eyes. "You requested the transfer to Fort Richards 6 months ago, specifically to my command." Harrington tapped a folder. "A decorated major with your qualifications could have gone anywhere. Pentagon, Special Forces, yet you chose a training base in Colorado." He met her gaze directly. "Why?" For the first time, Morgan's composure wavered slightly. "Your reputation, sir?" "My reputation?" Harrington leaned back. "I'm an old warhorse put out to pasture before retirement. What about my reputation would attract someone with your potential?" Berlin, 1988, Morgan said simply. Operation Quicksilver. The colonel's expression hardened instantly. His hand moved unconsciously to cover the scars on his right hand. That operation remains classified, Major. Even acknowledging its existence is a breach of security protocols. Yes, sir. Just as the operation at Fort Braxton remains classified. Morgan's eyes never left his face. The one involving my father. The room fell silent. Harrington studied her for a long moment before reaching into his desk drawer. He removed a small electronic device and placed it on the table. With the press of a button, a soft hum filled the room, a counter-surveillance measure. Captain William Morgan, Harrington said finally, 101st Airborne, died in a training accident in 1991, shortly after returning from Desert Storm. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. He was a good man, one of the best I ever served with. It wasn't an accident, Major Morgan stated, her controlled tone belying the intensity of her words. No, Harrington agreed quietly. It wasn't. He stood moving back to the window. Your father discovered something at Fort Braxton, a system of abuse protected by a network of senior officers. He gathered evidence, followed protocol, reported through proper channels. The colonel's reflection in the glass looked suddenly older. They silenced him, made it look like an equipment failure during a routine exercise. Morgan's jaw tightened, the only visible sign of the emotion beneath her composed exterior. You've spent your entire career preparing for this moment, haven't you? Harrington turned to face her. Military intelligence, advanced investigation techniques, creating the perfect service record, all to position yourself to finish what your father started. My father believed in the system, sir. He believed in proper channels and chain of command. Morgan's voice remained steady, but a cold determination entered her eyes. His mistake was trusting the wrong people with the truth. Harrington nodded slowly. Which is why you came to me. He returned to his desk, opening another file. Because of Berlin. Because you knew I once uncovered a network of double agents within our own ranks during the Cold War. Because you believe I understand that sometimes the greatest threats come from within. Yes, sir. The colonel slid a folder across the desk. Fort Braxton, last 2 years. 15 harassment complaints disappeared into administrative black holes. 8 female soldiers either transferred or separated from service early after filing reports that vanished without investigation. He tapped the folder. The pattern is accelerating. More incidents, more victims, more effective cover-ups. Morgan opened the folder, scanning the contents with professional detachment despite the churning in her stomach. The same patterns her father had documented 30 years earlier were not only continuing but thriving. The Pentagon suspects a systematic protection network, Harrington continued, but traditional investigation methods have failed. The institutional loyalty among certain command elements shields the perpetrators. He paused. Which is why I've been authorized to implement Operation Internal, a deep cover mission to infiltrate and document the harassment culture and identify those providing administrative protection. Morgan looked up from the file. You need someone on the inside. Yes, someone with exceptional training who can handle themselves in dangerous situations. Someone with intelligence experience who knows how to gather evidence covertly. Someone with a personal stake in seeing justice done. Harrington met her gaze. I need you, Major. What's the approach, sir? The colonel slid another file across the desk. This one contained a new set of military identification papers, transfer orders, and background documents. Captain Alexandra Alex Stone, Harrington explained, recently transferred from Administrative Division. Excellent service record, but nothing that would raise eyebrows. You'll be temporarily reduced in rank, accepting the professional risk to document the harassment culture and identify the protection network. Morgan opened the file, studying her new identity. Deliberately undistinguished, sir. Perfect bait, Harrington confirmed. Capable enough to be respected, but not so exceptional as to raise suspicions. The kind of officer they might see as vulnerable. The implication hung in the air between them. You understand what I'm asking, Major? Harrington's voice was grave. This isn't a standard assignment. You'll be deliberately placing yourself in the path of predators. There are significant personal risks involved. Morgan closed the file with a decisive snap. My father died trying to stop these men through official channels, sir. I've spent my entire career preparing to finish what he started. Her eyes held an intensity that even Harrington found unsettling. I'm ready. The memory surfaced as her military transport approached Fort Braxton. Ellie had been 12 when the officers came to their door. She remembered her mother's collapse, the folded flag, the rifle salute at Arlington. Later came the nightmares, her father's voice calling for help, trapped in darkness. Then at 16, she found the hidden files. Her father had documented everything meticulously: dates, locations, names, patterns of abuse. The final entry had been made 3 days before his accident. He'd identified key figures in the protection network and was preparing to submit his evidence to the Inspector General's office. He never got the chance. The file had disappeared from their house the day after the funeral. The only reason Ellie had found it was because her father had created a duplicate hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of The Art of War in his home office. That night she'd made her decision. West Point, military intelligence. Whatever it took to position herself to finish her father's mission, to restore honor to his name, to ensure that what happened to him wouldn't happen to others. Now, 30 years later, the transport touched down at Fort Braxton. Ellie, now Captain Alexandra Stone, gathered her belongings and prepared to enter the Lion's Den. Welcome to Fort Braxton, Captain Stone. Sergeant James Williams extended his hand as Ellie stepped off the transport. In his early 40s, Williams had the weathered look of a career soldier who'd seen more than his share of combat. His handshake was firm, his eyes direct, but not challenging. Thank you, Sergeant, Ellie replied, adopting the slightly hesitant demeanor she'd crafted for Captain Stone. Competent, but not exceptional. Confident, but not imposing. I appreciate the welcome. Colonel Harrington sent word you were coming, said you were one of the good ones. Williams picked up her duffel bag despite her protest. Let me show you to your quarters, then give you the lay of the land. As they walked, Williams provided a rundown of the base operations, key personnel, and daily routines. His manner was professional but friendly, a welcome contrast to the suspicious glances from other soldiers they passed. You've got good timing, Williams said as they approached the officers' quarters. Monthly qualification drills start tomorrow. Good way to meet most of the command staff at once. I heard the standards here are rigorous, Ellie commented, carefully gauging his reaction. Something flickered across Williams' face. So briefly she almost missed it. They have their own way of doing things here, that's for sure. His voice remained neutral, but the slight tension in his shoulders told a different story. Lieutenant Colonel Foster runs a tight ship, old-school military. Ellie filed the reaction away for later analysis. Anything I should know before I meet him? Williams hesitated, then spoke carefully. Foster values tradition and hierarchy. He and Command Sergeant Major Wilson have been together since Desert Storm. They're tight as ticks. He set down her bag outside her quarters. They have strong opinions about the changing face of the military. The implication was clear. I see, Ellie said. And where does Master Sergeant Drake fit into this structure? Williams' surprise was evident only in the slight widening of his eyes. You've done your homework, Captain. He glanced around before continuing, his voice lower. Drake's Foster's right hand for training, decorated combat veteran. Afghanistan 4 tours. He's effective, but his methods are controversial. Let's just say he believes military readiness doesn't allow for softness. Williams chose his words with obvious care. Some find his approach motivational. Others find it. He trailed off, then straightened his posture. You'll form your own opinions, Captain. Ellie nodded mentally, adding another piece to the puzzle. Thank you for your candor, Sergeant. I appreciate having a sense of the landscape. Williams gave her a measuring look. Just doing my job, ma'am. He hesitated, then added, if you need anything at all, my office is in the MP headquarters. Doors always open. After he departed, Ellie entered her quarters and performed a thorough sweep for surveillance devices. Finding none, she removed a small case from a hidden compartment in her duffel. Inside lay the surveillance equipment Harrington had provided, technology developed for Cold War espionage operations modified for her mission. The recording devices were smaller than a dime, virtually undetectable by standard sweeps. The transmission system operated on frequencies outside normal monitoring ranges. The storage unit could capture thousands of hours of audio and video without degradation. As she secured the equipment, her father's voice seemed to echo in her mind. The truth doesn't matter unless you can prove it, Ellie girl. Evidence is everything. She would gather that evidence, no matter the personal cost. The officers' mess hall buzzed with conversation as Ellie entered the following evening. After a day of orientation and qualification drills, she deliberately timed her arrival to coincide with peak dinner hours. Maximum exposure, maximum observation opportunities. She felt the evaluating glances as she moved through the serving line. Some merely curious. A new face always attracted attention on base. Others more calculating, assessing the potential threat or opportunity she represented. She kept her expression neutral, her posture deliberately relaxed, but not confident enough to be challenging. Selecting a table near the center of the room, she positioned herself to observe as many interactions as possible while remaining visible to all. The perfect bait, as Harrington had described. Visible, accessible, and apparently unaware of the predators circling. It didn't take long. Well, fresh meat. Master Sergeant Thomas Drake materialized beside her table, flanked by two corporals who shared his predatory energy. At 45, Drake had the hard-muscled build of someone who viewed physical training as religion. His neck bulged against his collar, his shoulders stretching the fabric of his uniform. A scar bisected his right eyebrow, giving him a perpetually questioning expression that contrasted with the cold assessment in his eyes. Captain Stone, isn't it? Drake didn't wait for an invitation before sliding onto the bench across from her. The two corporals remained standing, effectively blocking her from view of much of the mess hall. Administrative transfer. Interesting choice for Fort Braxton. We don't get many desk jockeys here. Ellie met his gaze with carefully modulated composure, neither challenging nor submissive. Every base needs administration, Sergeant Drake, even one with your reputation for intensity. Drake's eyes narrowed fractionally. You've heard of me. Your reputation precedes you. Ellie took another bite of her meal, deliberately making him wait for elaboration. Drake leaned forward, his massive forearms on the table. And what reputation would that be, Captain? 4 tours in Afghanistan, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Distinguished Service Cross. Ellie recited the facts from his file, watching his reaction. They say you're the toughest training sergeant in the 5th Army Group. A smile spread across Drake's face, though it never reached his eyes. That's right, I turned soldiers into warriors. He gestured to the corporals behind him. These boys can tell you, my methods work. The corporals nodded on cue, their expressions a mixture of pride and something darker. A shared secret, perhaps, or the satisfaction of being on the inside of an exclusive club. I'm sure they do, Ellie replied, her tone neutral, though I understand not everyone appreciates your approach. The temperature at the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. Drake's smile vanished, replaced by a calculating assessment. You've been talking to people. Just getting oriented, Ellie said, maintaining her composure. It's important to understand the command structure and training philosophy of a new post. Drake studied her for a long moment before responding. Let me give you some friendly advice, Captain. This isn't some cushy Pentagon office. Fort Braxton has standards, traditions. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. Some officers come here thinking they're special, thinking their fancy degrees or progressive ideas matter. His breath carried the scent of coffee and cigars. Those officers don't last long. Is that a threat, Sergeant? Ellie asked, her voice carrying just enough edge to establish she wouldn't be easily intimidated. Drake laughed, the sound utterly devoid of humor. A threat? No, ma'am, just a friendly observation about natural selection. He stood towering over her. The Army has a way of sorting the weak from the strong. Always has. As he and his entourage departed, Ellie noticed a young female soldier watching from across the mess hall. Private First Class Rachel Jenkins, according to her name tape. The technical specialist quickly averted her gaze when she realized Ellie had noticed her attention, but not before Ellie caught the unmistakable look of concern in her eyes. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. 3 days later, Ellie stood at attention in Lieutenant Colonel Foster's office, maintaining the perfect military bearing that had been drilled into her since West Point. At 58, Robert Foster carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who viewed military discipline as a religion rather than a profession. His graying hair was cut high and tight, his uniform immaculate, his office a shrine to 3 decades of military service. Your qualification scores are acceptable, Captain Stone, Foster said, reviewing her file. Though I note your marksmanship is merely adequate. We expect excellence at Fort Braxton, not adequacy. Yes, sir, Ellie responded deliberately, suppressing the sniper skills that would have allowed her to outshoot anyone on base. I'll continue to work on improvement. Foster's eyes flicked it up to study her face. See that you do. Master Sergeant Drake reports that your physical fitness scores, while within regulation parameters, show room for significant improvement. Ellie had deliberately performed at 80% of her capability during the physical fitness test, strong enough to meet standards comfortably, but not exceptional enough to draw unwanted attention. I understand, sir. I'll increase my training regimen. See that you do. Foster closed the file. Fort Braxton maintains the highest standards of any training facility in the 5th Army Group. We produce soldiers who are ready for the harshest combat conditions. There is no room for... He paused, his gaze measuring weakness. The implication hung in the air between them. I assure you, sir, I'm not weak, Ellie stated, allowing a hint of steel to enter her voice. Foster's expression remained unreadable. We'll see, won't we? He gestured toward the door. That will be all, Captain. As she departed, Ellie noted Command Sergeant Major Victor Wilson waiting outside. The senior non-commissioned officer's cold eyes tracked her as she passed, his weathered face set in a permanent scowl. At 52, Wilson carried himself with the dangerous confidence of someone accustomed to wielding power through intimidation. The new blood settling in, she heard him ask Foster as the door began to close. Another one with attitude, Foster replied. We'll see how long that lasts. The door clicked shut, but not before Ellie glimpsed the knowing look that passed between the two men. The pattern emerged quickly over the next 2 weeks. Drake's special training sessions for female soldiers. Foster's dismissal of complaints as failure to adapt to military standards. Wilson's intimidation of potential witnesses. The system worked with mechanical efficiency, a well-oiled machine designed to protect predators and silence victims. Each night, Ellie documented her observations using Harrington's equipment, transmitting encrypted data packets during scheduled communications windows. The evidence was mounting, but she needed more. Concrete proof of the protection network, documentation of the systematic nature of the abuse, identification of all key players. On the 15th day, an opportunity presented itself. Private Jenkins approached her after the morning formation, her manner nervous but determined. Captain Stone, could I speak with you privately about the equipment requisition forms? The pretext was thin, but Ellie recognized it immediately. Of course, Private. My office in 15 minutes. Once inside the privacy of her office, Jenkins' demeanor changed. The nervous recruit was replaced by an intense young woman with clear intelligence burning in her eyes. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. Granted, Ellie replied, activating one of Harrington's counter-surveillance devices as she spoke. Jenkins took a deep breath. You're not what you seem, Captain. Before Ellie could respond, she continued rapidly. 2 weeks ago, I was repairing the secure communications equipment in Sector 4 when I noticed an unusual transmission pattern. Military-grade encryption, but not standard protocol. Her eyes met Ellie's directly. The kind used by military intelligence for covert operations. Ellie maintained her neutral expression, though internally she reassessed the young soldier before her. That's a serious observation, Private. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you're here undercover, ma'am. Jenkins lowered her voice further. And I want to help. For a long moment, Ellie said nothing, weighing her options. Jenkins represented either a valuable ally or a dangerous security breach. The decision would shape the entire operation moving forward. Why would you want to help with a requisition audit, Private? Ellie asked, carefully maintaining plausible deniability while assessing Jenkins' true intentions. Because of Melissa Cortez, Jenkins answered, her voice hardening. She was my bunkmate, filed a harassment complaint against Drake 3 months ago. 2 days later, she was found unconscious in the shower. Skull fracture. They called it a slip and fall. Her hands clenched into fists. She was the third captain, the third female soldier to have an accident after filing a complaint. Ellie felt a cold anger settle in her stomach. And what happened to Cortez? Medical discharge. She's still in rehab, learning to walk again. Jenkins' eyes blazed with contained fury. I've been gathering evidence since it happened. Server access logs, medical reports, witness statements. But I'm just a private. Nobody listens to me. Why come to me? Why now? Because I saw how Drake targeted you in the mess hall last week. How you handled it. Jenkins' expression turned resolute. And because you're the first officer who's ever watched back. Most of them just look away. Ellie made her decision. I can't confirm or deny anything you're suggesting about my assignment here, Private. But hypothetically, if someone were conducting an investigation, detailed evidence from a credible insider would be invaluable. Understanding passed between them. I can provide that evidence, Jenkins said quietly, and I can help you reach others who are too afraid to come forward. That would be extremely dangerous, Ellie cautioned. If Drake or Foster suspected, with respect, ma'am, I stopped worrying about my safety the day I held Melissa's hand in the hospital. Jenkins straightened to attention. Some things are worth the risk. As the private departed, Ellie felt something she hadn't experienced in years, hope. The system her father had fought against 3 decades earlier might finally be dismantled. Justice long delayed might finally be served. But first, she needed to spring the trap. That evening, Ellie deliberately entered the mess hall alone during peak dinner hours. Through Jenkins, she'd learned that Drake and his associates targeted female soldiers who isolated themselves, creating opportunity through vulnerability. Tonight, she would create that opportunity, knowing that Drake couldn't resist such perfect bait. A female officer alone who had already challenged his authority once. She selected a table in the rear corner away from the main flow of traffic and began eating with deliberate focus. The surveillance equipment concealed in her uniform would capture every word, every gesture. The transmitter would relay it all in real time to Harrington's secure server. She didn't have to wait long. Drake's shadow fell across her table like an advancing storm front. Behind him stood the same 2 corporals, their posture radiating the casual cruelty of men accustomed to intimidating with impunity. Around them, conversations quieted as nearby soldiers sensed the approaching confrontation. You look lonely over here, Captain, Drake said, his voice carrying the deliberate slowness of a predator savoring the hunt. Maybe you need some real soldiers to show you how things work around this base. The words hung in the air thick with suggestion. The corporals exchanged knowing grins behind him, their body language creating walls of intimidation through physical presence alone. Ellie set down her fork with measured precision and met Drake's gaze directly. I appreciate the offer, Sergeant, but I prefer to eat in peace. Perhaps you could find another table. Drake straightened slightly, his shoulders tensing as the rejection registered. His face flushed red as the corporals exchanged uncertain glances behind him. Peace is for civilians, sweetheart, he said, his voice rising enough to catch the attention of nearby tables. This is the Army, and you need to learn your place before someone teaches it to you the hard way. The conversations around them faded as soldiers turned their attention toward the confrontation. Ellie remained seated, her posture relaxed but alert, a coiled spring waiting for the right moment. Her training had prepared her for exactly this scenario. Sergeant, I suggest you return to your meal and leave me to mine, she said, her voice carrying the unmistakable weight of command authority despite her deliberately calm delivery. This conversation is over. The finality in her tone should have ended the encounter. But Drake had built his reputation on never backing down, especially when an audience was watching. His hand shot out faster than most people could track, closing around her collar and yanking her halfway across the table. The fabric tightened against her throat as he pulled her face closer to his. You think you can give me orders? He hissed, his breath hot against her face. His free hand connected with her cheek in a sharp crack that echoed through the suddenly silent mess hall. The sound hung in the air like thunder after lightning, followed by the collective intake of breath from dozens of shocked witnesses. Ellie absorbed the blow without flinching, her head turning slightly with the impact before slowly rotating back to face him. She touched her cheek with measured deliberation, feeling the heat spreading across her skin. Then she stood with the fluid grace of someone who had survived countless life-or-death situations, her movements economical and purposeful. The mess hall fell completely silent. 300 soldiers frozen in their seats as they witnessed something they instinctively knew would change everything. Drake stepped back, his confidence wavering, as he saw something in her eyes that made his survival instincts scream warnings. The corporals shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware they had participated in something far more serious than routine harassment. The moment stretched like a taut wire pregnant with possibility in consequence, as Ellie stood silently contemplating her response. Her expression revealed nothing of her thoughts, but her stillness carried more weight than any immediate retaliation. The silence shattered when Private Jenkins dropped her coffee cup. The ceramic crashed against concrete, jolting the mess hall back to life as whispered conversations erupted among soldiers processing what they had witnessed. The trap had been set, the bait taken, and the predator exposed. The hunt was on. Military Police Staff Sergeant James Williams received the call while reviewing incident reports in his office. A physical altercation in the mess hall involving Master Sergeant Drake and Captain Stone required immediate response. The duty officer explained with a clipped efficiency that characterized urgent situations demanding senior investigator attention. Williams gathered his team and crossed the base in less than 4 minutes, his mind already calculating the implications. He'd witnessed Drake's intimidation tactics before, but an assault on a commissioned officer represented a significant escalation. This wasn't merely harassment, it was a direct violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The mess hall buzzed with nervous energy when Williams arrived. Soldiers clustered in small groups, voices hushed, glances darting between Drake and Captain Stone. The tension in the air was palpable, electric, with the shared understanding that a line had been crossed. Drake stood near the serving line, his posture radiating the confidence of someone who believed rank and connections provided immunity from consequences. He greeted Williams with a firm handshake and the knowing smile of one soldier addressing another about the unfortunate necessities of maintaining military discipline. "The little captain over there showed serious disrespect, Sergeant," Drake explained, his tone casual. "I had to remind her that the Army has standards even for female officers who think they're special." His explanation carried the casual authority of someone who had delivered similar justifications before and received administrative protection rather than punishment. Williams surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of an investigator who had handled hundreds of incidents during his 14-year career in military law enforcement. The witness positioning told a story that contradicted Drake's casual explanation. Their uncomfortable body language suggested they had seen something far more serious than routine correction of disrespectful behavior. Several soldiers clutched phones discreetly, suggesting they had captured evidence before military police arrived. Captain Stone sat calmly at her table, continuing her meal despite the red mark blooming across her left cheek, evidence of significant force delivered with clear intent to harm. Her composure struck Williams as unusual for someone who had just been publicly assaulted. Most victims showed emotional distress, anger, or fear. Stone displayed the steady control of someone accustomed to violence and trained to maintain operational effectiveness regardless of personal circumstances. "Captain, I need your statement about what occurred here tonight," Williams said, keeping his voice professional and neutral as he approached her table. Stone provided her account with military precision, describing the encounter in factual terms without emotional embellishment or personal opinion. "Master Sergeant Drake approached my table uninvited, made inappropriate comments about my presence in the mess hall, escalated to verbal harassment when I asked him to leave, then struck me across the face when I informed him our conversation was over." She touched her cheek briefly. "He also grabbed my collar and restricted my breathing momentarily." Williams took statements from 6 witnesses whose accounts aligned with disturbing consistency. Each described Drake's aggressive approach, his inappropriate comments, and the unmistakable sound of his hand connecting with Stone's face. Their nervousness suggested possible intimidation, but their statements remained clear and detailed. Medical personnel arrived to document Stone's injury, photographing the bruising and swelling that confirmed witness testimony about the force of Drake's blow. The base physician noted that the mark pattern indicated an open-handed strike delivered with significant power consistent with deliberate assault rather than accidental contact. Drake demanded to speak with Williams privately, pulling him aside with the casual authority of someone who expected cooperation. "Listen, this is getting blown out of proportion," Drake insisted, his voice low. "That captain was showing attitude, and I corrected her like any NCO would correct a disrespectful officer. These kids today don't understand military bearing, and sometimes you have to remind them physically about the standards we maintain." The explanation troubled Williams deeply. Physical correction of commissioned officers by enlisted personnel violated every regulation and custom in military tradition, representing complete inversion of the authority structure that maintained order and discipline. Yet Drake described it as routine procedure, his confidence suggesting either complete ignorance of military law or institutional protection that made him feel untouchable. Master Sergeant, you do understand that striking an officer is a direct violation of Articles 89 and 91 of the UCMJ, Williams asked carefully. Drake's smile never wavered. Come on, Williams. We both know how these things work. Foster will handle it administratively. No need for formal charges. The casual assumption of protection confirmed Williams' suspicions about the institutional network that had buried previous incidents. He maintained his professional demeanor while mentally cataloging Drake's statement as evidence of conspiracy. I'll need to complete my investigation before any determinations are made, Williams replied neutrally. Drake's expression hardened slightly. Don't make this complicated, Sergeant. Some paths lead nowhere good for ambitious MPs. The threat hung in the air between them, unmistakable in its intent. Williams had heard similar warnings throughout his career. The unspoken brotherhood that protected certain soldiers from accountability, the implicit understanding that looking the other way led to promotion while pursuing justice against the wrong people, ended careers. He had ignored such warnings before. It had cost him advancement opportunities, prime assignments, and professional relationships. But Williams had joined the military police with a simple conviction: the law applied equally to everyone who wore the uniform, regardless of rank or connections. I'll be sure to include your statement in my report, Master Sergeant, Williams said, his tone revealing nothing of his thoughts. Drake nodded, mistaking Williams's professional demeanor for compliance. Good man, I knew you'd understand the bigger picture. As Drake walked away, Williams noticed Captain Stone watching their interaction from across the room, her expression unreadable. Something about her calm assessment made him wonder if she understood more about the situation than her statement suggested. He had encountered intelligence officers before. They had that same quality of seeing beyond the immediate circumstances to the larger pattern beneath. Williams opened an official investigation within 2 hours of the incident, his preliminary report noting serious inconsistencies between Drake's explanation and witness accounts. The staff sergeant's claim of justified correction directly contradicted established military protocol, while his confidence suggested institutional protection that warranted deeper examination. Drake called Lieutenant Colonel Foster before Williams completed his investigation report, speaking with the familiar tone of someone contacting a reliable ally. We've got a situation that needs managing, Drake explained, describing the mess hall incident as minor correction blown out of proportion by oversensitive witnesses. Foster assured Drake he would handle the situation through appropriate administrative channels, their conversation carrying the implicit understanding that had protected Drake through previous complaints. Neither man realized that their call had been monitored through an encrypted channel authorized by the Pentagon's Inspector General's office. Williams had just submitted his report through official channels when Foster summoned him to his office. The lieutenant colonel's expression was thunderous as Williams entered and came to attention. At ease, Sergeant, Foster said, his voice deceptively calm. I understand you have initiated an investigation into the incident between Master Sergeant Drake and Captain Stone. Yes, sir. Standard procedure for any physical altercation on base, especially one involving an officer. Foster leaned forward, his hands folded on his desk. I appreciate your thoroughness, Sergeant, but I'll be handling this matter administratively. Drake is a decorated combat veteran who's trained hundreds of soldiers for successful deployment. His methods may be unconventional, but his results are unquestionable. With respect, sir, unconventional methods don't include striking officers, Williams replied carefully. Foster's expression hardened. You weren't there, Sergeant. Witness accounts are often unreliable, colored by personal biases and misperceptions. I've spoken with Drake and several senior NCOs who were present. They describe a situation where Captain Stone was insubordinate and Drake responded with necessary correction. Williams maintained his professional composure despite the blatant attempt to rewrite events. My investigation collected statements from 6 independent witnesses, sir. Their accounts consistently describe unprovoked assault, not correction. Your investigation is concluded, Sergeant, Foster stated flatly. This matter will be handled through administrative channels appropriate to the situation. I expect your final report on my desk by 0800 tomorrow, reflecting the administrative resolution of this incident. The order was clear. Falsify findings to protect Drake. Williams had faced similar moments throughout his career points, where following orders meant betraying the principles that had led him to military service. Each time the choice remained the same. Sir, I'm obligated to conduct a thorough investigation in accordance with military police regulations and submit findings based on evidence, not predetermined conclusions, Williams said, knowing the professional consequences that would follow. Foster's face flushed with anger. You're overstepping your authority, Sergeant. I'm giving you a direct order regarding the handling of this incident. In order to falsify an investigation report would be unlawful, sir, Williams replied steadily. I respectfully cannot comply. Foster rose from his chair, leaning across the desk. 23 years I've given to this Army sergeant. I've sent men into combat and brought them home again. I've built training programs that save lives in the field. And now you question my judgment over some administrative dust-up. His voice dropped dangerously. Consider your future carefully before you continue down this path. William stood his ground. My duty is to military law, sir, not to personal loyalties or preferences. Get out of my office, Foster snarled, and understand that your transfer paperwork to Fort Irwin will be processed by the end of the week. The Mojave Desert should give you plenty of time to reconsider your approach to chain of command. William saluted crisply and departed, his expression revealing nothing of the cold determination that had settled in his chest. The threat of transfer didn't surprise him. It was a standard tactic used against those who challenged the protection system. What Foster didn't realize was that Williams had anticipated this response and taken precautions. Before submitting his official report, Williams had sent a duplicate directly to the Inspector General's office, bypassing the local command structure that might interfere with proper investigation procedures. The action violated protocol. Reports should follow chain of command. But Williams had learned through bitter experience that some situations required extraordinary measures. He returned to his office to find Private First Class Jenkins waiting nervously outside his door. Her expression suggested urgency mixed with apprehension. Private, Williams acknowledged. What can I do for you? Jenkins glanced down the hallway before responding. Permission to speak privately. Sergeant. Williams unlocked his office door and gestured her inside. Once the door closed, Jenkins's nervous demeanor shifted to focused intensity. I have evidence you need to see, Sergeant, she said, producing a small data drive from her pocket. Security camera footage from the mess hall. The system automatically archives video every 12 hours, but I pulled this before the scheduled data purge. Williams accepted the drive, studying the young soldier with newfound appreciation. This is outside your duties. As a technical specialist private, accessing security systems without authorization could result in disciplinary action. Some things are worth the risk, sir, Jenkins replied without hesitation. Williams connected the drive to his secure terminal. The footage showed the mess hall incident from multiple angles, clearly documenting Drake's unprovoked aggression, the collar grab that restricted Stone's breathing, and the forceful strike that followed. The video evidence eliminated any possibility of misinterpretation or dispute about the sequence of events. This contradicts Master Sergeant Drake's statement completely, Williams observed, and Lieutenant Colonel Foster's characterization of events. That's not all, sir, Jenkins said, her voice dropping. I've been documenting similar incidents for the past 6 months. Patterns of harassment, intimidation, and abuse, primarily targeting female personnel. She accessed another folder on the drive revealing dozens of files meticulously organized by date, location, and personnel involved. Williams scanned the documentation with growing disbelief at both the extent of the abuse and the comprehensive nature of Jenkins' unauthorized investigation. How did you collect all this? Williams asked, professional admiration mixing with concern about the risks she had taken. I'm assigned to systems maintenance, sir. I service the security cameras, communication equipment, and network infrastructure across the base. People don't notice technicians. We're basically invisible. Jenkins' expression hardened. After my bunkmate was assaulted for filing a complaint, I started paying attention. Setting up backup archives for security footage before scheduled deletions. Creating secure storage for medical reports that mysteriously disappeared from official systems. Williams continued reviewing the files, recognizing a pattern far more extensive than his own investigations had uncovered. The documentation revealed not merely isolated incidents, but a systematic campaign of abuse, protected by an institutional network that extended through multiple levels of command. "This is extremely serious, Private," Williams said finally, "and extremely dangerous for you personally. If Drake or Foster discovered what you've been doing—" "With respect, sir, they nearly killed my friend," Jenkins replied, her voice steady despite the emotion beneath. "Someone has to stop them before they succeed with someone else." Williams made his decision. "I'm submitting everything. My investigation findings, the video evidence, and your documentation directly to the Inspector General's office tonight. This goes beyond base-level incidents. This is systematic abuse protected by command authority." Jenkins nodded, relief visible in her expression. "Captain Stone is involved too, isn't she? She's not just a random victim." Williams studied the young soldier, weighing how much to reveal. "What makes you think that?" Her reaction in the mess hall. No normal officer absorbs a strike like that without flinching. She was expecting it. Jenkins's perceptions surprised Williams, and her electronic communications use military intelligence encryption protocols. "I recognize the patterns from my technical training." "That's speculation, Private," Williams cautioned, though privately he had reached similar conclusions about Stone's unusual composure and background. "Yes, sir," Jenkins agreed, not pressing the issue. "What happens now?" "Now we wait," Williams replied, "and we watch our backs. When systems like this are threatened, they become unpredictable." The warning proved prophetic within hours. Command Sergeant Major Wilson summoned Jenkins to his office that evening, ostensibly to discuss communication equipment maintenance. The moment she entered, Jenkins recognized the pretext for what it was: isolation for intimidation. Wilson closed the door behind her, his physical presence dominating the small office. At 52, he retained the muscular build and predatory movements of the special operations soldier he had once been, before turning to private military contracting between his service periods. "Private Jenkins," he began, circling behind her as she stood at attention. "I understand you have been spending time with the military police today, specifically with Staff Sergeant Williams." "Yes, Sergeant Major. I was providing technical assistance with communications equipment." Wilson moved directly in front of her, standing close enough that she could feel his breath. "Don't insult my intelligence, Private. You were observed entering the MP offices with a data drive. The same offices where an investigation is being conducted against Master Sergeant Drake." Jenkins maintained her military bearing despite the intimidation tactic. "I provided technical assistance as requested, Sergeant Major." Wilson's hand shot out, grabbing her upper arm with bruising force. "Listen carefully. Whatever you think you're doing, whatever evidence you think you have, it ends now. Fort Braxton handles its disciplinary matters internally. We take care of our own." "Is that what happened to Specialist Cortez, Sergeant Major?" Jenkins asked, a dangerous edge entering her voice. "Taking care of your own." Wilson's grip tightened painfully. "Accidents happen, Private, especially to soldiers who don't understand their place in the chain of command." He released her arm with a slight push that caused her to stumble. "Consider this conversation your only warning." Jenkins straightened her uniform, her expression betraying none of the fear and anger coursing through her. "Will that be all, Sergeant Major?" Wilson studied her for a moment, surprise flickering across his features at her continued composure. "Dismissed, Private. Remember, some lessons are only taught once." The threat hung in the air as Jenkins departed, her mind already calculating how to secure the additional evidence she had gathered. Wilson would undoubtedly report their conversation to Foster and Drake, accelerating whatever countermeasures they planned against the investigation. She needed to warn Williams and Stone before the protection network could fully mobilize. Meanwhile, Drake had initiated his own counter-strategy, approaching several junior officers with whom he maintained influence through a combination of professional mentorship and subtle intimidation. By morning, rumors began circulating about Captain Stone's mental stability, her supposed history of filing unsubstantiated complaints, and her alleged inability to adapt to proper military discipline. The character assassination campaign followed a familiar pattern: discredit the victim before formal proceedings could establish fact from fiction. Similar tactics had succeeded against previous complainants, creating doubt that undermined their credibility before investigations could be completed. What Drake didn't realize was that Stone had anticipated this response, deliberately cultivating relationships with key personnel whose observations would contradict the emerging narrative. Her carefully constructed persona as Captain Alexandra Stone included detailed documentation of all professional interactions, performance evaluations, and training participation, creating an unimpeachable record that directly challenged Drake's characterizations. Foster employed more direct methods using his command authority to reassign Williams to perimeter security duties, effectively removing him from the investigation he had initiated. The transfer paperwork to Fort Irwin remained on Foster's desk, a Damocles sword hanging over Williams' career, unless he abandoned his pursuit of justice. Simultaneously, Foster implemented administrative roadblocks that delayed evidence processing, restricted access to witness statements, and limited communication channels to external oversight agencies. These bureaucratic maneuvers had successfully buried previous complaints, transforming legitimate investigations into procedural quagmires that eventually died from institutional neglect. By evening, the protective network appeared to be functioning as designed. The investigation stalled, the primary investigator neutralized witnesses, intimidated, and the victim's credibility undermined through calculated character assassination. Then Inspector General Colonel Hayes requested Stone's immediate presence at his office. The summons carried unusual urgency that suggested complications beyond routine assault investigation. Drake relaxed upon hearing the news, assuming his connections had triggered protective intervention. Williams worried his investigation might be buried through administrative manipulation. Stone entered Hayes' office to find Pentagon officials present via secure video conference, their presence indicating this exceeded normal base-level incident management. Hayes gestured to a chair, his expression carefully neutral, as he addressed her with formal precision. "Major Stone, please provide your assessment of the operation's success." The room fell silent as the revelation landed like a bomb. Stone wasn't Captain Alexandra Stone conducting routine duties. She was Major Eleanor Morgan, a seasoned Inspector General investigator who had been undercover at this base for 3 weeks, deliberately positioned to document systematic harassment and identify the institutional protection network that had enabled predatory behavior. Hayes explained the situation to the stunned officers on the video conference. Major Morgan volunteered for temporary reduction in rank to infiltrate as a captain, accepting the professional risk to document the harassment culture and identify those providing administrative protection. Stone removed a small recording device from her uniform collar. The incident with Drake wasn't an accident or unfortunate encounter. It was a deliberately constructed scenario with me creating the opportunity for predators to reveal themselves through their natural behavior patterns. She connected the device to Hayes' computer, transferring weeks of surveillance data that documented not only the mess hall assault, but dozens of prior incidents involving Drake Foster and Wilson. The comprehensive evidence included recorded conversations, security footage, testimony from victims, and communications between protection network members discussing management of complaints. Staff Sergeant Williams has been conducting his own independent investigation, Stone continued. His findings corroborate our intelligence, completely showing remarkable courage in challenging the protection network despite threats to his career. Hayes nodded. We've received his report through secure channels. His documentation of systemic abuse protected by command authority provided crucial independent verification of our operation findings. One of the Pentagon officials leaned forward on the video screen. And Private Jenkins, was she part of your operation as well? No, sir, Stone replied, genuine admiration in her voice. Jenkins initiated her own evidence collection entirely independently at significant personal risk. Her technical expertise allowed her to document incidents that might otherwise have gone unrecorded. Her courage in coming forward, despite intimidation, has been extraordinary. Hayes presented the evidence they had compiled. Drake had assaulted 6 other female soldiers over 2 years, each incident documented, but never resulting in official investigation or disciplinary action. Foster had manipulated reports and intimidated witnesses through his position as an operations officer. Wilson had threatened soldiers who attempted to pursue complaints through proper channels. The protection network extended through 3 command levels, with 23 documented harassment cases that had been systematically buried through coordinated administrative manipulation. Stone had recorded her entire interaction with Drake using concealed equipment. Military intelligence had intercepted phone calls between Drake and Foster discussing management of the situation. Email evidence showed coordination between Foster and Wilson regarding complaint suppression and witness intimidation. The documentation was irrefutable. A systematic conspiracy to protect predatory behavior while punishing victims who sought accountability through proper military justice channels had been operating with institutional support for at least 2 years. This evidence justifies immediate action, one Pentagon official stated. Colonel Hayes, you're authorized to implement Contingency Plan Alpha. Secure all suspects and evidence. Full Pentagon support is authorized. Hayes nodded, his expression grim but satisfied. Already in motion, sir. Military police teams have been pre-positioned to detain Drake Foster and Wilson simultaneously to prevent evidence, destruction, or witness intimidation. All electronic systems have been locked down to preserve documentation. Stone's 3 weeks of calculated risk and controlled vulnerability had culminated in this moment, the dismantling of a protection network that had enabled years of abuse. The system her father had died trying to expose 30 years earlier was finally facing accountability. As she left Hayes' office, Stone encountered Williams waiting in the hallway, his expression a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal vindication. "You knew all along," he said quietly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You weren't just a random target, you were the bait in a trap they didn't see coming." Stone allowed a small smile, the first genuine expression she had shown since arriving at Fort Braxton. Sometimes the only way to expose predators is to appear vulnerable while being anything but. Williams nodded, professional respect evident in his gaze. "Your father would be proud, Major." Stone's composure wavered slightly at the unexpected reference. "How did you—" "I served with Captain William Morgan during Desert Storm," Williams explained. "He was investigating similar abuses when he died. The similarities in your approach were too precise to be coincidence." For the first time since the operation began, Eleanor Morgan felt the weight of personal history alongside professional duty. The mission wasn't just about military justice. It was about completing what her father had started, exposing the system that had silenced him permanently 3 decades earlier. "He believed in doing things by the book," Stone said quietly, "following proper channels and protocols. It got him killed." "Times change," Williams replied. "The system your father believed in is finally catching up to the principles he died for." As they spoke, military police teams moved efficiently across Fort Braxton, executing synchronized arrests with precision that left no opportunity for resistance or evidence tampering. Drake was detained while instructing a training session, the public nature of his arrest sending a clear message throughout the base. Foster was secured in his office while attempting to delete electronic records. Wilson was apprehended while threatening Jenkins in a maintenance tunnel, caught in the act of intimidation that formed another count in his growing list of charges. The protection network that had operated with impunity for years collapsed in a single coordinated action, exposed by the combined efforts of an undercover major, a principled military policeman, and a courageous private who refused to look away from injustice. The battle had been won, but the war against institutional protection of abuse had only begun. As night fell on Fort Braxton, Stone prepared for the next phase, transforming evidence into justice through military legal proceedings that would hold accountable not just the direct perpetrators, but the system that had protected them. The coming days would determine whether the exposure of this protection network would create lasting change or merely prune branches from a tree with roots that ran deep through military culture and tradition. For Stone, Williams, and Jenkins, the commitment to see justice done had already cost each of them in different ways. Career risks, personal safety, and emotional wounds reopened. None of them regretted the price. Some principles demanded sacrifice. Some truths required champions willing to stand alone if necessary. Some battles needed to be fought regardless of personal cost. As Major Eleanor Morgan prepared the comprehensive evidence for military prosecutors, she felt her father's presence more strongly than she had in 30 years. The mission he had begun had finally reached its conclusion. The truth he had died protecting would finally be heard. Justice delayed for decades was finally within reach. The military courtroom stood silent as the gavel fell, marking the beginning of proceedings that would reshape Fort Braxton forever. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across polished floors, where justice had often been promised, but rarely delivered. Today would be different. Colonel Richard Brennan, the presiding military judge, surveyed the courtroom with eyes that had witnessed 30 years of military justice. His weathered face revealed nothing as he reviewed the charges before him. Assault on a commissioned officer, conduct unbecoming abuse of authority, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and witness intimidation. The list continued, each charge more serious than the last. These proceedings will come to order, Brennan announced, his voice carrying the weight of military tradition and legal authority in equal measure. Master Sergeant Thomas Drake sat at the defense table in full-dress uniform, ribbons and medals displaying a career of combat excellence that stood in stark contrast to the predatory behavior now exposed. His attorney, a former JAG officer specializing in defending high-profile military cases, projected confidence that belied the overwhelming evidence against his client. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Foster occupied a separate defense table, his once imposing presence diminished by 3 weeks in pretrial confinement. His gaze frequently drifted to the empty chair where Command Sergeant Major Wilson should have been sitting. The conspicuous absence, a reminder that Wilson had accepted a plea agreement in exchange for testimony against his co-conspirators. Major Eleanor Morgan sat beside the lead prosecutor, her uniform once again displaying her true rank and decorations. The undercover operation had concluded, but her work continued, transforming evidence into justice through methodical legal process. Her testimony would provide the framework around which the prosecution would build its case, supported by documentation so comprehensive it left no room for reasonable doubt. "The United States calls Major Eleanor Morgan," the prosecutor announced after preliminary motions concluded. Morgan took the stand with measured steps, her posture perfect, as she raised her right hand for the oath. The courtroom watched with undisguised interest. Many had known her only as Captain Stone, the seemingly vulnerable administrative officer whose assault had triggered the investigation. The transformation from target to architect of justice fascinated even those who had served alongside her during her undercover assignment. "Major Morgan, please explain your role in the investigation at Fort Braxton," the prosecutor began. "I was assigned by the Inspector General's office to conduct a covert investigation into systematic harassment and abuse at Fort Braxton." Morgan testified, her voice clear and precise. "Intelligence indicated a protection network that shielded perpetrators from accountability while punishing victims who reported through proper channels. I voluntarily accepted reduction to captain's rank and created the persona of Alexandra Stone to infiltrate the command structure without raising suspicion." "And what did your investigation discover?" Morgan outlined the protection network methodically. Drake as primary perpetrator, Foster providing command protection through administrative manipulation, Wilson enforcing silence through intimidation and threats. Her testimony detailed 23 cases spanning 2 years where complaints had been buried, evidence destroyed, and victims either transferred or forced out of military service. "The pattern was consistent," Morgan explained, gesturing to evidence displays where timeline charts documented the systematic nature of the abuse. Female soldiers who filed complaints experienced escalating harassment, followed by physical intimidation, followed by either manufactured disciplinary issues or suspicious accidents that resulted in medical discharge. Drake's attorney objected repeatedly, challenging Morgan's characterization of events and questioning her objectivity. Each objection fell before the mountain of evidence she had accumulated. Surveillance recordings, witness statements, intercepted communications, and medical records that formed an irrefutable pattern of abuse and protection. When Foster's attorney attempted to characterize his client's actions as administrative discretion within command authority, Morgan countered with documented evidence of Foster explicitly directing subordinates to alter official reports, intimidate witnesses, and destroy evidence of complaints. "This wasn't discretion," Morgan stated firmly. "This was deliberate obstruction of military justice to protect perpetrators at the expense of victims." By midday, the prosecution had established the systematic nature of the harassment culture. After lunch recess, they moved to specific incidents that demonstrated the escalating pattern of abuse. Staff Sergeant Williams took the stand, his testimony providing independent corroboration of Morgan's findings. As a military police investigator, his professional assessment carried particular weight with the court. "I documented 7 separate incidents where female soldiers reported physical or sexual harassment by Master Sergeant Drake," Williams testified. In each case, Lieutenant Colonel Foster intervened to terminate the investigation through administrative resolution that resulted in no disciplinary action against Drake, but frequently led to negative performance evaluations for the reporting soldiers. "And what happened when you attempted to pursue these investigations?" the prosecutor asked. "I received direct orders to close the cases without further action," Williams replied. "When I objected on grounds that such orders violated proper investigative procedure, I was threatened with transfer negative performance reviews, and in one instance, Command Sergeant Major Wilson suggested my vehicle might experience mechanical failure during night driving exercises." Drake's attorney attempted to characterize Williams as a disgruntled officer pursuing personal vendettas, but cross-examination only strengthened Williams' testimony. His meticulous documentation of threats and obstruction, maintained despite risks to his career, demonstrated professional integrity that resonated with the military court. The most compelling testimony came from victims who had previously been silenced by the protection network. Lieutenant Jessica Ramirez described being cornered in an equipment room by Drake, who had grabbed her throat while explaining that complaints go nowhere at Fort Braxton. Sergeant Michelle Coleman recounted being forced to perform extra physical training in isolation where Drake had accidentally torn her uniform during hand-to-hand combat demonstration. Private First Class Tanya Wilson detailed how her medical records had mysteriously disappeared after she reported Drake shoving her against the wall during a performance counseling session. Each victim's testimony reinforced the others, creating a pattern too consistent to dismiss and too specific to fabricate. The defense attorney's attempts to characterize the incidents as training intensity or miscommunication collapsed under the weight of cumulative evidence. Command Sergeant Major Wilson's testimony, secured through plea agreement, delivered the final blow to any possible defense. His detailed account of the protection network's operations confirmed that Foster had created a systematic process for bearing complaints, manipulating evidence, and intimidating witnesses. "It was standard procedure," Wilson testified, unable to meet the eyes of his former colleagues. Drake identified targets, usually female soldiers without strong connections or protective mentors. Foster ensured any complaints disappeared into administrative black holes. "I made sure witnesses understood the consequences of cooperation with investigations. And these consequences included what specifically?" the prosecutor asked. "Physical intimidation, career threats, isolation during training exercises where accidents could be arranged." Wilson's voice had dropped so low, the court recorder had to request he speak up. "In 3 cases, I personally arranged for soldiers to experience physical injuries that could be attributed to training incidents, but were actually retaliation for filing complaints." Drake's composed facade cracked as his former ally detailed their joint operations. Foster stared straight ahead, his military bearing maintaining an outward appearance of control, while his defense collapsed under Wilson's revelations. By the 4th day of proceedings, Private First Class Rachel Jenkins provided technical testimony that sealed the prosecution's case. Her detailed documentation of electronic evidence tampering, security footage, manipulation, and communication interception demonstrated both the sophistication of the protection network and the extraordinary measures Jenkins had taken to preserve evidence despite personal risk. "I established secure archive protocols that captured surveillance footage before scheduled deletion." Jenkins explained, walking the court through technical procedures with confidence that belied her junior rank. "I also created backup systems for medical records that were frequently altered or deleted from official databases after harassment complaints were filed." "And you undertook these measures on your own initiative?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes, sir. After my bunkmate suffered a skull fracture following her complaint against Master Sergeant Drake, I realized the official systems were compromised. Someone needed to ensure evidence survived for proper investigation." The defense attorneys attempted to characterize Jenkins' actions as unauthorized system access and security violations, but Colonel Brennan intervened directly. "Private Jenkins acted to preserve evidence of serious crimes being committed against her fellow soldiers," Brennan stated firmly. "Her technical expertise was applied in service of military justice when official channels had been compromised. This court recognizes her actions as commendable service under extraordinary circumstances." The acknowledgement brought a murmur of approval from observers, the first emotional response the disciplined courtroom had permitted during 4 days of damning testimony. After closing arguments, Colonel Brennan required only 3 hours of deliberation before rendering judgment. The courtroom filled beyond capacity for the verdict announcement, with soldiers from across Fort Braxton crowding the available space. Many were the victims who had previously been silenced, now present to witness justice long delayed. This court has reviewed extensive evidence of systematic abuse protected by coordinated obstruction of military justice. Brennan began his expression grave as he addressed the defendants. The violations documented in these proceedings represent not merely individual criminal acts, but a fundamental betrayal of the trust placed in non-commissioned and commissioned officers. Drake received 5 years confinement at Fort Leavenworth and dishonorable discharge and forfeiture of all benefits and retirement pay. Foster's sentence included 3 years confinement, dismissal from service, and loss of all retirement benefits. Wilson's plea agreement resulted in 18 months confinement and dishonorable discharge in exchange for his testimony. 4 additional officers received administrative punishment and removal from command positions. Let these sentences serve notice throughout our military, Brennan concluded. The abuse of authority and protection of predatory behavior will not be tolerated within our ranks. The strength of our military depends not merely on combat readiness, but on the integrity of those entrusted with the welfare of our soldiers. As the defendants were escorted from the courtroom, Morgan observed the proceedings with the quiet satisfaction of mission accomplishment. The system her father had fought to expose 30 years earlier had finally faced accountability. The price of that accountability, including her father's life and her own 3-week ordeal, seemed justified by the justice now delivered. Colonel Hayes found her outside the courtroom after proceedings concluded. The Inspector General's weathered face revealed rare approval as he approached. "Outstanding work, Major," Hayes said simply. "Your operation has implications far beyond Fort Braxton. The Pentagon has authorized comprehensive review of harassment complaint procedures across all bases with particular focus on administrative resolution practices that may have enabled similar protection networks elsewhere." Morgan nodded professional satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that Fort Braxton represented merely one installation among hundreds. "The problem isn't limited to one base or command structure, sir." "No, it isn't," Hayes agreed, "which is why I've been authorized to offer you a new assignment." He handed her a sealed folder. "Deputy Director of Special Oversight Division. You'd lead a team tasked with identifying and dismantling similar protection networks across all branches. Complete operational authority with direct reporting to the Secretary of Defense." Morgan accepted the folder, momentarily speechless at the scope of the assignment. The position represented unprecedented authority to implement systematic change, not merely addressing symptoms but restructuring the systems that enabled abuse. "Your father would be proud, Eleanor," Hayes said quietly, using her first name for the first time in their professional relationship. "He tried to change the system from within, following every regulation and procedure. Times have changed. We now recognize that sometimes the regulations themselves become weapons for those who would abuse power." "He believed in the system," Morgan replied, memories of her father surfacing with unexpected emotional force, "even when it failed him." "The system is only as good as the people who implement it," Hayes said. "Your father's generation built the foundation. Your generation has the opportunity to correct the structural flaws he identified, but couldn't address within the constraints of his time." He gestured to the folder in her hands. "Consider the assignment. Take whatever time you need." As Hayes departed, Morgan opened the folder and reviewed the mission parameters for Special Oversight Division. The scope was breathtaking. Authority across all military branches, direct Pentagon support resources to implement comprehensive reforms beyond any previous efforts. Williams approached as she studied the documents, his expression mixing satisfaction with new purpose. "Heard you're headed to the Pentagon," he said. "Special Oversight Division needs good people." Morgan looked up with surprise. "You've been briefed already." "More than briefed," Williams replied with a slight smile. "I've been reassigned as your Chief of Investigations if you'll have me." Hayes thought you might appreciate having someone who's fought these battles from the trenches. For the first time in years, Morgan felt something beyond professional satisfaction, a genuine connection to the larger purpose that had driven her father and now defined her own career. "I'd be honored, Sergeant. This mission needs people who understand both the regulations and the reality of how they're applied or circumvented." "Speaking of your team," Williams continued, "there's someone else you should consider." He gestured toward Jenkins, who stood nearby, watching the defendants being escorted to transport vehicles. Her technical skills and moral courage would be invaluable. Pentagon could fast-track a commission based on her performance during this operation. Morgan studied the young soldier thoughtfully. Jenkins had demonstrated extraordinary initiative, technical expertise, and personal courage throughout the investigation. Qualities that couldn't be taught but formed the foundation of effective oversight operations. Private Jenkins, Morgan called her decision made. A moment of your time. Jenkins approached and came to attention, her bearing reflecting the discipline that had enabled her to maintain a covert evidence collection operation for months, despite significant personal risk. At ease, Private, Morgan said. I have a proposition for you. Within 24 hours of the court's decision, Pentagon officials arrived at Fort Braxton to implement comprehensive reforms. New harassment prevention training achieved 100% certification rates with annual recertification requirements. Direct reporting procedures to Inspector General personnel eliminated administrative delays that had enabled protective relationships. Jenkins received promotion to Staff Sergeant and appointment as Base Harassment Prevention Coordinator before accepting Morgan's offer of a commission, an assignment to Special Oversight Division. Her courage in providing testimony and maintaining covert evidence collection earned recognition throughout command structures that had previously ignored junior enlisted perspectives. Williams was promoted to Chief of Investigations with expanded authority, his reputation for integrity now enhanced by his central role in exposing the protection network. The Prevention Office occupied prominent administrative building space with dedicated staff and direct Pentagon reporting authority. Base climate surveys showed dramatic improvements in unit cohesion, institutional trust, and personnel satisfaction with command responsiveness. What had begun as an isolated investigation into a single protection network had catalyzed institutional change with implications across the entire military structure. 1 month after the court proceedings concluded, Morgan stood in Arlington National Cemetery, the autumn leaves falling gently around her father's grave. She knelt to place fresh flowers beside the military headstone that had marked his resting place for 30 years. It's done, Dad, she said quietly, her hand resting on the cool marble. The system you believed in finally worked the way it was supposed to, not just for you, but for everyone who comes after. Colonel Harrington approached silently, respecting her private moment before making his presence known with a discreet cough. His silver hair caught the afternoon sunlight as he came to attention beside Captain William Morgan's grave, rendering a perfect salute to his fallen comrade. Your father was one of the finest officers I ever served with, Harrington said after lowering his salute. He believed in doing things the right way by the book. It got him killed because the book couldn't account for people who used regulations as weapons rather than guidelines. Morgan nodded, rising to her feet. You knew all along what happened to him, didn't you? That's why you selected me for Operation Internal. I suspected, Harrington corrected gently. During Desert Storm, your father approached me about irregularities he'd documented at Fort Braxton, similar protection networks, similar patterns of abuse and cover-up. I advised him to follow proper channels, build his case methodically through official procedures. The colonel's weathered face revealed decades-old regret. It was the wrong advice. The system wasn't ready to confront its own failures. He would have followed your advice regardless, Morgan said. That's who he was. He believed in the integrity of the institution, even when individuals within it failed to meet that standard. Harrington reached into his pocket and withdrew a tarnished set of captain's bars. These were your father's. Military police recovered them during the investigation into Foster's office. He had kept them as some kind of trophy. When the colonel placed them gently in Morgan's hand, I thought you should have them. Morgan closed her fingers around the metal insignia, feeling a connection to her father more tangible than any memory. Thank you, sir. The annual Stone Standard ceremony becomes official next month, Harrington said as they walked slowly among the graves of generations of military service members. Every base will implement mandatory training and certification in harassment prevention protocols. Your father's name and legacy will shape military culture for decades to come. Morgan absorbed this information with quiet satisfaction. The mission that had begun with personal loss had transformed into institutional change that would protect countless service members from the abuse her father had died trying to expose. In Special Oversight Division, Harrington asked. Have you decided? Morgan nodded, her decision made final by this moment of connection between past and future, between her father's sacrifice and her own opportunity to complete his mission on a scale he could never have imagined. I report to the Pentagon next week. Williams and Jenkins are already setting up operational protocols. They couldn't have chosen better leadership, Harrington said with genuine approval. Your father believed in working within the system. You've learned to transform the system itself when necessary. He gestured toward the endless rows of headstones stretching across Arlington's hallowed grounds. That's how progress happens, each generation building on the sacrifices and lessons of those who came before. As they reached the cemetery gates, Harrington offered a final salute, not to Morgan's rank, but to the mission she had completed and the one she was about to begin. Your father saw problems that needed fixing. You've created solutions that will prevent those problems from recurring. That's a legacy worth building. Morgan returned the salute with parade ground precision, honoring not merely military tradition, but the continuity of purpose that connected her father's courage to her own determination. The system he had trusted had failed him, but the principles he had defended had ultimately prevailed through his daughter's commitment to completing his mission. 1 week later, Major Eleanor Morgan stood before 30 newly commissioned officers at West Point, her position as Deputy Director of Special Oversight Division, granting her the authority to shape military culture from its foundation. These young officers represented the future of military leadership, the generation that would implement and maintain the reforms her father had died pursuing and she had successfully established. The strength of our military rests not merely on tactical proficiency or strategic capability, Morgan told them, her voice carrying across the auditorium where she had once sat as a cadet herself. It rests on the moral integrity of those entrusted with the welfare of their soldiers. Leadership isn't about rank or authority. It's about accountability and responsibility for those under your command. She described the protection network at Fort Braxton without identifying specific individuals, using the case study to illustrate how systems designed for legitimate administrative discretion could be weaponized to enable abuse when moral courage failed. The cadets listened with focused attention, recognizing that her words carried the weight of hard-won experience rather than theoretical instruction. You will face moments in your careers when following regulations conflicts with protecting your soldiers, Morgan continued. In those moments, remember that regulations exist to serve justice, not to obstruct it. The true measure of your leadership will be found not in your combat decorations, but in how you protect those who serve under your command. After the formal presentation concluded, a female cadet approached Morgan with the direct gaze of someone whose questions ran deeper than polite conversation. Major Morgan, she began, her voice steady despite obvious nervousness. My father served with Captain William Morgan during Desert Storm. He told me what happened at Fort Braxton 30 years ago and how your father died trying to protect soldiers from systematic abuse. She stood straight, her determination evident in her posture. I chose West Point because of that story, because I wanted to be part of making sure what happened to him doesn't happen to others. Morgan studied the young cadet with newfound appreciation for how individual courage created ripples across generations. Her father's stand against injustice, though it had cost him his life, had inspired others to continue the mission he had begun. That inspiration now extended to a new generation of officers committed to the principles he had defended. What's your name, Cadet? Morgan asked. Cadet Rebecca Martinez, ma'am. My goal is to join military police and eventually Inspector General Operations. Martinez, Morgan repeated, recognition dawning. Any relation to Sergeant Lisa Martinez from Fort Braxton? The cadet nodded. My aunt, ma'am. She was one of the victims who testified in your case. Her injuries required 3 surgeries and extensive rehabilitation. The connection completed a circle that spanned decades and generations, from William Morgan's initial investigation to Eleanor Morgan's successful prosecution, now extending to Rebecca Martinez's commitment to continuing their shared mission. Special Oversight Division will be watching your career with interest, Cadet Martinez, Morgan said, offering her hand. We need officers who understand that moral courage sometimes requires standing alone against comfortable consensus. As Morgan departed West Point that evening, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a 12-year-old girl, receiving her father's folded flag to the architect of military justice reform that would shape institutional culture for decades. The cost had been high. Her father's life, her own years of single-minded preparation, the physical and emotional toll of Operation Internal. Yet standing among the next generation of officers, seeing determination in young faces like Cadet Martinez Morgan, recognized that the price had purchased something beyond personal vindication or institutional reform. It had established a legacy that would protect countless soldiers through structural changes her father could only have dreamed of implementing. The system he had trusted had ultimately delivered justice not through blind adherence to regulations, but through the moral courage of individuals committed to its fundamental principles. Williams Jenkins, Hayes Harrington, each had risked career and personal safety to uphold the ideals that gave military service its meaning and purpose. As her car passed through Arlington Cemetery on the way to Pentagon headquarters, Morgan rendered a final salute to her father's generation, the soldiers who had built the foundation upon which she now constructed lasting reform. Their sacrifice had made possible her opportunity to transform individual courage into institutional change. The mission her father had begun 30 years earlier had found completion not merely in the prosecution of his killers, but in the fundamental reformation of the system that had failed him. Through his daughter's determination, William Morgan's legacy would protect generations of soldiers he would never meet, fulfilling the oath of service that had guided his life and now defined his daughter's purpose. Justice delayed had finally become justice delivered. The silent inspector had completed her mission,